Hi, this is Anna London with Divergence, and in this episode, we're going to talk about disenfranchised grief and what that means, right? You know, you're likely familiar with feelings of grief, but did you know that there are different forms of grief? You know, the experience of grief is different from person to person, right? And even environment to environment and culture to culture. But sometimes normal grief can take a turn and become something a little different. You know, there are some common variations of disenfranchised grief, complicated grief, compounded grief, and anticipatory grief. Today, we're going to unpack disenfranchised grief and the impact it has on grieving people the world over. So first, what is normal grief, right? You know, to everyone, it's subjective, right? Normal is subjective, right? So before we dive into disenfranchised grief, it's important that we understand what normal grief is, okay? A grief, in essence, is our natural human response to the loss of someone or something we love or cherish. The emotions of grief vary greatly, of course, to sadness, anger, guilt, relief, and shock. But they are all normal responses to loss. And as much as we may prefer not to feel or deal with these types of emotions, they're actually a healthy part of the grieving process. Okay, so grief is often accompanied by age-old rituals that bring us all together to grieve, right? We hold hands, we offer words of support and love, we send cards and flowers, make donations, and deliver hot meals to the grieving families, right? We stand together to support those who are grieving and give them emotional and physical support as they mourn. But what if your grief was unacknowledged? No one stopped to listen to you and there were no sympathetic words, right? Or was counter to what your belief system is, right? They disvalue or devalue, right? Your concerns, your angst, your consternation, right? So let's enter disenfranchised grief together. It was first coined by Dr. Kenneth Doka, and he mentions that it is complicated, but put in the simplest terms, it's grief that cannot be openly acknowledged, socially sanctioned, or publicly mourned. Okay, and often the grief is minimized or not understood, either by ourselves or society in general, or even within our families, our groups, or even our cultures. And this element of misunderstanding only further complicates the issue, right? You've often seen, too, when there's mourning a loss of maybe a child has gone missing or a person, a death in the family. And, maybe it's something that's newsworthy, right? Or that, the society thinks is newsworthy. I think every life is of equal value. No one's more valuable than another person. I think we're all of equal value, whether or not you're a celebrity or whomever you are, right? So it's just like with the helicopter accident, right, with Kobe and his beautiful daughter. And trust me, I'm a Kobe fan, but there are only a few times where the other people even mentioned that died on the helicopter. Kobe's life wasn't any more valuable to any other people that were on that helicopter that went down, right? They're equally valuable. So why aren't we mourning for and supporting those other families, right? You don't have to be just a celebrity. I think that's ridiculous. We idolize people that we don't even know, right? And, look, when our feelings of grief aren't acknowledged or are minimized, we may begin to feel that our grief is inappropriate, invalid, or unacceptable in some way, right? And naturally, when we do feel that our emotions are shameful, we're less likely to share what we're feeling, but we'll instead internalize it, right? I'm guilty of that as well, right? Disenfranchised grief is often lonely, private, and we may feel that there must be something wrong with us or, for feeling a certain way, right? And just like when I was mentioning the newsworthy aspect, right? So, for instance, a child goes missing or something. I mentioned that because, they'll interview the parents. And of course, the first thing they do is look at the parents as the target, right? As the suspects, right? The people of interest, naturally. The people closest to that child, right? May have had something happening to that child. So, but if you notice, all the body language, even their tone and inflection, everything is highly criticized, right? Everything is, hyper analyzed under a microscope. right? But who are we to judge, honestly? And yes, there are behavioral experts, okay? Us in the military too, we're trained to look at body language as well, to see if somebody's lying to us, right? Or what have you, if somebody's deceitful, or even the tone and inflection. You can actually tell, even on Twitter Spaces, you can tell when people are, they're not authentic, or they're deceitful. You can tell, especially right now with what's going on in the world. But again, our grieving process and the way we grieve is something very personal with us, and our higher power, right? Our whoever you look to, right? God or whomever, right, is your is the power that you seek, for solace, for guidance, for, whatever you're doing. That's up to you. And people should not judge that, right? But, humans, that's the way we are. We judge everyone, right? So, we're not really supposed to judge, yet ye be judged, right? That's in the Bible, but everyone judges each other ridiculously. And I think, I wish that would stop. I wish for peace in the world, but I don't know, with the way humans are from the onset of the moment we were created, we're imperfect. And, so it's, I don't know, there have been wars upon wars upon wars, and conquer and this and that. And it's just ridiculous. I don't know that we'll ever change as humans. Look, disenfranchised grief, isn't black and white. Okay, it is very subjective. Two people may experience the exact same loss, but for one, the loss is openly acknowledged and mourned, while for the other, it's minimized, potentially, right? And though they've experienced the same loss, for one of them, it was disenfranchised. So to help us get a better grip on this concept, disenfranchised grief typically falls into three buckets, generally. At times, the loss may fall into more than one bucket as well, right? So this isn't putting everybody in a box, right? Because everybody mourns differently. And again, culture and religion also comes into play with this as well, right? And some people are introverts, some people are extroverts, some people just kind of bottle it up and decide to have some alone time. Other people, need to be around other people, right? So let's talk about some of these buckets, if you will. One is, the first one is where the relationship is unrecognized. So our first bucket is that our relationship to the person who has died is unrecognized, okay? Perhaps the relationship was private or estranged, or we're grieving someone we really didn't personally know. In this situation, our loss may not be recognized or understood by others, and in some cases, our relationship to the deceased may even be a source of contention and pain to close family members. So with these factors in place, of course, we may feel unable to mourn in the usual way and could end up internalizing the pain because we have no external outlet. And so when a relationship isn't recognized, we may not be viewed as a griever, so people don't see or understand the depth of our feelings. And a few examples of this are the death of an ex-spouse or a estranged relative or friend, a celebrity, public figure, or relationship, that we may keep private, right? The second bucket that we're going to talk about is a loss that's unacknowledged or deemed less significant. Many forms of disenfranchised grief fall into this bucket. But when a loss is unacknowledged, as is the case with many miscarriages, for instance, right? For anybody that's suffered from miscarriage, or maybe deemed less significant, like the loss of a pet, when it falls into a disenfranchised grief, so oftentimes these losses don't fall into a group's accepted definition of grief, okay? And again, a loss is a loss is a loss, and again, we need to make sure that everyone's grief is valued, and there's no way to slice and dice or put people in a bucket of grief, right? Disenfranchised grief is subjective, right? It's very subjective. And society may accept our loss as worthy of grief, but our family may not, When our grief is found unacceptable by someone or anyone, even uncomfortable, for instance. It may hinder our ability to grieve well and openly, which could cause deep and lasting distress, for the others around us and for those and for us internally. Some examples of when a loss is unacknowledged or deemed less significant, are like I was mentioning, the miscarriage, right? Or stillbirth or infertility or traumatic birth experience. I don't think people can really fathom what that's like, to be able to carry life in your womb and then something happens, right? Breakups, that's another loss people experience. Divorce, right? That's a loss that people experience. Estrangements, a job loss, a pet loss, death of an adult sibling, stepchild or step-sibling, or an unmarried partner. Grieving the loss of a foster family member, for instance, or loss of possessions or your home, like in a fire, a natural disaster, hurricane, etc. Death of a coworker, death of a celebrity, or deterioration of one's health. Or like in the case of the world right now, for me, I'm grieving the loss of the way we were pre-COVID, because ever since COVID happened, it's been just downward spiral. We've lost law and order. It's just been chaotic, and people aren't held to account. I think it's just the world has gone disarray, and I don't know if we'll ever get normalcy back. I don't even know what that looks like anymore. So I'm actually mourning that loss because it seems like we're getting worse and worse. We're not getting any better. So that's where I'm having disenfranchised grief right now. And so that's why I did post something in X, Spaces, if you will, the X Twitter, formerly Twitter, concerning disenfranchised grief, that's also what I'm also feeling, right? And I feel a lot of us are too, feeling that, and so it's like, can anybody relate? Okay. So, a loss is something, people don't know how to talk about, right? So it's generally unacknowledged or avoided, okay? Miscarriage is a perfect example of that. A lot of times people don't know how to approach, even other women that haven't experienced that. They don't know how to approach you or anything about that loss. Unless we find someone who's gone through that. Similarly, for instance, me being in the military, a lot of folks can't relate to that, what that experience is like, right? And so I find myself being able to better talk with other veterans that can relate to that. A lot of people, maybe watch a movie or maybe their parent has served. Okay, that's wonderful. But unless you have in fact served, then you have no idea what it's like. And there's no way you can relate or understand what we go through or have gone through, right? Also, overseas, during war, right? During combat, when you survive, but the others around you have not. There's that grief, it's almost like you feel guilty. It's that survivor's guilt, right? Loss surrounds something that people don't think is as significant as other forms of loss. So let's talk about, like, for an example, right? So why are we grieving the loss of our stuff when people died in that natural disaster? Right? So yes, it's the loss of material possessions, but it's still a loss of comfort, peace, memories, or perhaps even a home or livelihood, especially if that's got all your, familial pictures or keepsakes, things that cannot be replaced, right? Yes, technically you can replace the material, but it might have sentimental value, right? And so it's the experience that you relate to that object, right? And so, that's significant and valid to you. And feeling grief over the loss of possessions doesn't mean you don't mourn the loss of people. You can feel both at the same time, okay? Which is completely valid and completely normal. Okay, so let's talk about the third bucket, and that is stigma surrounding the loss. So this bucket, and the final bucket we're going to talk about today relates to losses that are surrounded by stigma in some way. So often stemming from the method of death. So we may feel unable to fully grieve because of the circumstances of the loss. A few examples of this includes suicide, for instance, drug overdoses, AIDS, murder, or the driver in a drunk driving incident. And it could also be grieving someone who's incarcerated, missing, dealing with a mental illness, or who has run away. And the loss could also be stigmatized because The relationship before the loss was not recognized. So for example, the death of an ex-spouse could be doubly disenfranchised because the relationship is unrecognized and may also be stigmatized, especially if things are still unresolved between the two parties and their families. Overall, disenfranchised grief means that what we're feeling isn't accepted by someone we deem important. Okay? So this could be society as a whole, family, friends, or even ourselves. So we can convince ourselves that we have no right to grieve this loss, but unfortunately, that attitude won't stop the feelings or help us work through them. And we may feel judged or criticized by others for our grief, making us feel alone, embarrassed, or ashamed. So what can we do, right? And if you've noticed, even when I had cancer was another thing where, I was diagnosed with colon cancer back in 2015. No, I'm a survivor. I'm good. I'm not saying this for anybody to feel sorry for me. But when I was diagnosed with cancer, the mortality, right, of the human construct, e.g. my own life, had become a great deal more apparent than it had been before. So you always think you're going to live forever, okay? And that's not the case, right? We know we're going to die. You just think you have a lot more time than what you feel you do, right? You don't know when is tomorrow going to come, is it not, etc. Right? So I was mourning that, and I was even creating poems and letters and getting stuff situated just in case, right? So I was mourning that potential loss, right, of something. And again, this health. So earlier we talked about different aspects. So health is one of that. So that would fall into that bucket, right, of things that they would grieve. And for me, that's what I went through. Now I'm okay now, right? But I get it. And so let's talk about how we can help move towards healing, okay? No matter what you're grieving, okay, whether it be person, place, thing, possession, etc. So, first of all, right, if we are going through disenfranchised grief right now, we're not alone, and our grief is valid, okay? We have nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed about. Grief is a natural response to the losses in our lives, no matter what form that loss takes. So now let's talk about some suggestions for moving forward towards healing as we would work through our disenfranchised grief. First of all, you need to validate the loss within ourselves. So while it's helpful to have others validate our feelings, it's not necessary really to move towards healing. The most important thing is for us to realize within ourselves that our feelings of grief are real and legitimate. And it's okay if people around us don't really fully understand. The most important person to validate our loss is us, ourselves, right? Look in the mirror. It's us, okay? So we need to work towards acknowledging that what we feel and how we feel, okay, it's all part of the grief journey, okay? And if you don't allow yourself to grieve, then trust me, it may not hit now, but it'll hit maybe a year from now, 6 months from now, 3 months from now, and all of a sudden tears will come down your eyes. Because when I was first diagnosed with cancer, I was good. I was government at the time, and I was in a conference room, and out of nowhere, tears just came down my eyes. And luckily someone in that room was a colon cancer survivor, and maybe I just needed to hear that message, but I had to excuse myself for a moment and then come back in. But normally I'm really good. I'm stoic and I'm able to maintain my composure, but you never know. That's why you have to deal with it. You just have to deal with it. You have to deal with it in your own time, but you can't postpone it because you can't postpone the inevitable, right? You'll have the up and down roller coaster of emotions, but you don't know when it's going to rear its head, right? So it's good to just tackle it straight on, right? The grief that children feel also. So let's talk about that as well, because we always look at the parents, but we forget about the children, okay? Children, have grief as well. And those feelings are often overlooked or unacknowledged even. So we need to take extra effort to listen to them too and validate their feelings and offer support to our children in our lives who are grieving, whatever it might be, right? Whatever it might be. Because remember, person, thing, possession, pets, our pets, which are our family, right? So, we also need to find supportive people, whoever they may be. So as we work towards fully realizing and accepting that our loss is valid and worth grieving, we need to find supportive people to talk to and do life with, basically. So like I mentioned earlier about, being military, right? And so I find folks that can relate. Because if I was to talk to somebody about what I've gone through in the service, the average person cannot relate. They're going to sit there, okay, I understand, but really they don't. They don't. It's a completely different life. Honestly, you're a soldier 24/7. It's a completely different lifestyle. Even if you were a wife or a spouse, basically a partner of a person that served, it's still not the same. I'm sorry, it's just not, unless you've worn the actual uniform. Nothing against any of the spouses out there, because they do a lot too, and they do a lot for our service members and support and keep the home front, going and what have you. So while we service members can go out and do what we need to do, fight for the freedoms in which everyone right now is taking full advantage of, right? But with that said, right, like with cancer, people are not going to really understand cancer either. Oh, you'll get through it. Well, okay, you need to talk with other people, and there's support groups, right? There's lots of things. Maybe you're a recovering addict, maybe alcohol or drugs or whatever. So, reach out to your AA or NA, right? I guess Narcotics Anonymous, right? Chapters, whatever it might be that can help you get through it. Go to your local church or what have you. Many times, though, I found that in churches, though, the way I seek God is in solitude. In a church, they're very judgmental. I've found. I wouldn't say everyone, but there's a lot of people that I've found when I've tried to talk through things, they're very judgmental, or, they have, an opinion for every problem, but it ends up becoming more of a problem than a solution, honestly. So, do what you need to do and talk with who you need to talk to. Okay. Find your tribe, basically your people. Okay. That can relate, genuinely. Okay. Is my point. We could start with, understanding, maybe an understanding close friend or family member. Okay. Family can tend to be very judgmental as well, and also if you're dealing with relationship problems, let's just say with your spouse or with your boyfriend or your partner, be very careful on who you talk to, because in that moment, that information, then people are judged. They judge you and the way your relationship. So be very careful on who you talk to in that regard. Like married couples, right? You should talk to other married couples. Single people talk to single people. Married people should not be talking to single people, because a completely different perspective. I'm sorry, it just is, right? So go to people that can actually relate with what you're going through. And trust me, you're not alone. You're not on an island, because other people experience a lot of the stuff we do. So, you need people who won't minimize your feelings, but will also accept and support you wherever you are on your grief journey as well, right? Consider sitting down with a support group, right? Like I was mentioning earlier, or, a therapist, right? If that helps. Sometimes you just need to talk with people, who understand what you're feeling and can help you identify it. Now, for me, I also use these podcasts many times as therapy. It's very therapeutic for me, honestly, to talk through what I'm feeling and expressing my ideas and thoughts in an open, judgment-free zone, if you will, at least for me. Okay. I'm not sure what you think when you listen, but I hope it's, of value to you. But many times these are definitely edutainment, right? We're all human, okay? It's the human dichotomy, and I think people kind of forget that. I think people have become desensitized, to the human emotion. I think sometimes people weaponize, though, human emotion, but there are legitimate times when people have legitimate concerns, and it needs to be, those need to be heard and valued, right? Once we've named our emotions, we can better communicate our feelings with the other people in our lives, right? And sometimes we just need to talk with people who can understand what we're feeling and can help us identify it as well. Sometimes talking through the problem. I journal, I write poetry as well. That also helps me to get through it. So sometimes I pray, I meditate, I do some things like that too, right? if we've been dealing with disenfranchised grief for a while, then we might strongly consider talking with a grief counselor or therapist, right? If you feel comfortable, okay, because they can help you understand your feelings, realize that it's okay to grieve, and offer a safe place to express ourselves, right? And provide resources that will help us move towards healing, okay? And, participate in healing rituals, right? So, normally when we lose a person we love, we have a funeral or a memorial service to honor and remember them. However, with disenfranchised grief, we may not have the opportunity to attend a funeral. And if we've lost something else, a funeral isn't even feasible, right? If it's a thing or whatever, right? So the principle remains the same, okay? We can participate in the healing rituals, whatever that might be for you, to help us engage with our feelings and begin to release them in a healthy way. So again, for me, podcast and a variety of things. So, I do podcast on cyber security. I do a variety of things, right? Because that's my passion. And, I love to help, folks transition into the cybersecurity domain space, right? That's been my bread and butter. That's been my passion for eons now. I love it. I'll probably be doing it till the day I perish. But I love it. I love helping people. Okay, that's what I do. So, look, let's talk about the ritual because while there may not be an official ritual available, we can create our own, okay? So we can box up our ex's belongings, for instance, to symbolize that the relationship's over. We can write a letter to say all the things we've left unsaid. We can light a candle or plant a tree in memory of the person. We can make a collage of photos, okay? If we've lost our home, we can write down memories we cherish from that time of our lives and reminisce. We can hold our own memorials. We can create a memory box or book with mementos and reminders. We can visit also the final resting place, okay? And we can use our creativity to process through our feelings. The list goes on and on. Find a ritual that speaks to your needs and just do it, whether it be by yourself or with others, Processing grief is hard work, but it's so important to our quality of life moving forward, because unaddressed grief can lead to many debilitating concerns, including depression and mood swings, okay, and even health. Instead of listening to those who might try to minimize our grief, we need to take time to listen to our feelings. We need to surround ourselves with supportive people and find a way to participate in healing rituals, whatever that may be. And whatever grief you're feeling, no matter what kind of loss you've been through, it's real, it's legitimate, and you have a right to grieve and find hope for the future in your way, in your time, okay? So there's no cookie cutter recipe for, how you should grieve, what you should look like, the length of grieving. I find too the loss. I lost my father in 2006. I lost both my grandparents in 2008. And then I proceeded to lose both of my uncles, okay, and the years after that. So I lost quite a few family members, actually, and so dealing with that, sometimes you feel numb. You just feel, it's very difficult. I wouldn't say that you never get over the loss of a loved one. It just kind of lessens the burden, I think, over time. But, I always think just like, there's, annual days. For instance, my father was born in April, right? And I'm not going to say the date because that can be used as social engineering, right? But born in April, at some point in April. And so, on that day or even Father's Day, right, I'll either post a Facebook thing or whatever. Like Veterans Day, too. He was a veteran. He was a Marine, then he was Army. He retired out of Colorado Springs, Colorado, so Fort Carson. So, so, I'll post something. I'll post his picture, etc., right? I'm a veteran, too. So my grandfather also was a veteran, so I come from a long lineage of veterans in my family. We serve. And, there's nothing like losing family members, and how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that loss? And so when I am speaking with other people that have recently lost a loved one, I'm very honest and I say, look, the grief doesn't go away. That hurt and pain, that loss, that feeling, that void that you will forever feel doesn't go away. It just kind of lessens a little bit over time, but only time can do that. And everybody needs to, and just, again, use those rituals, initially and maybe annually or on different anniversaries, of their death or of a birthday or what have you. Everybody does these things in their own way. Okay, and again, cultures signify also other different rituals that one may do, right? Religion affiliation also might delve into something that we may do, right, in order to do that. Sometimes it's very specific in that regard, and there's certain expectations, and sometimes people just don't put people in a box, is all I'm going to say, and allow people to grieve in their own way, and stop trying to play Dr. Phil, right? I'm not trying to play Dr. Phil or Phyllis, I guess, because I'm a female today, but my point to that is that I brought this up because I really do feel like I'm going through disenfranchised. I have disenfranchised grief because, again, I'm mourning the loss of our world. Our world is in disarray. It's likened to, if anything, if you really read, the end of times. I mean, it's everything. And I know for hundreds of years, people have said, the end of times are here. Every decade or so, somebody stands on the corner or something, said, the end of times is near, right? But I think in this case, I don't know. I think if we haven't been close, we're getting closer and closer now. That's for sure. I didn't think it would happen in my lifetime, but and we're not supposed to know really when it's going to come, but there are signs, and this seems to be the sign of the times. So who knows? So, anyways, get right with yourself. Come to peace with yourself. And do what you need to do to live your life. If you have anger and hurt and all that, it just tears at you from your core, and it'll eat you from the inside out. It just will. So be very careful with that. And, there is a purpose. I do believe that, whatever you believe in, universe, God, what have you. But I do believe that there is a purpose for folks. And I think that if you spend too much time grieving, okay, like I'm talking, using alcohol or drugs to kind of medicate yourself, right? To, avoid that hurt, then all you're doing is not only you're hurting your body, you're hurting your mind, but you're just delaying the inevitable anyways, okay, of you being a productive member of society. But then also all you're doing is postponing the fact that you're not really grieving because, you're just substituting something for something else, and it's just going to take longer. So do what you need to do in your own time, and, just be very careful, be very careful. People gain weight or they stop eating or what have you, right? Sometimes disorders can rear their ugly head where they weren't before or what have you, because you definitely become vulnerable, right? And be careful who you talk to too, because sometimes people can take advantage of you, right? They take advantage of, desperate people do desperate things in desperate situations. And when they find that you are vulnerable, then you can definitely be a target, right, and be victimized for whatever it is. So be very careful in that regard too. You may not care at the moment, but just know that others around you do care. And, if you're thinking about, taking your life or what have you, I mean, there are suicide hotlines and things like that. If you're a veteran, then call the crisis line. If you're a homeless veteran, you can actually call the crisis line and just wait for the prompt, and then because they'll forward you to like the homeless, department, if you will, to help you with the homelessness you may be experiencing, because there are actually options. So a lot of people are homeless for a variety of different reasons. A lot of folks right now are living paycheck to paycheck, and it doesn't take much, trust me, to end up on the street. Okay, entire families, right? So it's not just about drugs and alcohol. I wish people would stop looking down on people. Yes, there are people, on fentanyl and a variety of things, okay? But, everybody needs help, right, in their own way, and everybody has their own story, and I wish people would stop judging each other, right? We're all humans, and I wish people would just care for one another, right? Treat other people like you'd want to be treated, right? That's what it says in the Bible, right? But it's just true. It's just common courtesy and respect to our fellow humans, right, in the world. So anyways, with that said, again, I hope this has been of value to you. Again, I'm not a psychologist, so full disclosure, disclaimer, this isn't meant to treat any mental illness or anything like that. I am in no way, shape, or form have the ability to do that. You would need to seek out that from an actual licensed psychologist or therapist, okay? I'm only speaking from the point of sorrow for me, right? Feeling what I'm feeling and trying to research other elements so that you don't spiral into disarray, right? And into an abyss, right? So, talk to somebody, talk it through, talk it out, whatever it is. I do podcasts and what have you. I do all that. And I'm not afraid to say, I'll go to therapy too, not a problem. So I think people need to remove the stigma of that too. It's okay to talk with somebody, right? Whoever you feel comfortable with, right? Just don't allow people to use it against you, right? So, anyways, with that said, enjoy the rest of your day, and do what you need to do to become healthy, mentally, spiritually, physically, and don't let people try to put you in a box or a bucket or tell you should be over. Like partners too, you see that too, where, one person, maybe the husband might want to get rid of everything in the room because it reminds them of that child or of whomever, right, they lost. And the wife might say, no, I want to keep everything, right? And so there's that consternation there between the two, right? Because everybody grieves differently. They just do, Maybe there's a missing child. I say, children because, nobody wants anything to happen to children, right? And so if there's a missing child, for instance, the longer it goes, it's like, are they now being trafficked, right? Did something happen, right? Are they still alive even? Did somebody kidnap them and now they're living in another home or what have you, right? So that unknowing must be the worst grief that any parent could ever feel. And I could never, I just don't wish that on my worst enemy because that would be the worst feeling ever. I've had to where, even for like a second, it's like, oh my God, where's my child, right? Like you're in a store or whatever, and it's like maybe they duck behind the counter or whatever. I'm just saying just for a second, or playing or whatever. And it's like, oh my God, where it's like everything in you just kind of, the world just stops for a moment, right? So it's like a punch in the gut. And so, I don't even know what that even feels like. I've only had a taste of it, like I said, if my son or my daughter duck behind something or whatever, and, or you lose sight of them maybe on the playground or something, it's like, oh my God, where are they at, right? So, I've only had a taste of that. I don't want to ever experience that. I don't want anybody to ever experience that. But the not knowing, I think, would be worse for me, just like the hostages that were taken, right? From Israel on October 7th, not knowing what's going on, not knowing if your loved one's dead or alive, right? That would eat somebody alive. And so, again, and there's grief on both sides, obviously. Nobody wants anybody to die 100%. So I'm not sanctioning anybody to die, right, at all. Hamas are definitely terrorists and they need to be dealt with, okay? But in their stead, somebody else is, it's like a hydra, because in their stead, okay, you wipe them out, then somebody else is going to erect themselves. It happens, right? Look at Al-Qaeda, ISIS, all that. So that's never going to end, unfortunately. It's what's, I hate to say it, but expected, in that part of the world. It's almost like, because it's the teachings, it's what's being taught, right? And it's just unfortunate. So I would love peace in the Middle East. Absolutely. We all pray for that, right? But we need to think realistically. And so again, when you hear people, there's disenfranchised grief on both sides. Absolutely. But yeah, not knowing though, I can't even imagine and we have American citizens too, by the way, that were taken hostage as well. So we have American families that have been affected, right? We have people from all over the world that have been affected. Everybody wants to, demonize Israel. I'm not sure why, but I do know why people have that. It's perception and it's propaganda. But again, you need to just come back to the human element, right? And realize that everyone's thoughts should be valued, right? We're all humans at the end of the day, right? Aren't we? So I hope that war can end. I hope that they bring the Hamas and Hezbollah and all the leaders in Qatar to justice. The people in Iran that were behind it, everybody that funded it, right, should be held accountable, okay? Whether you fund it or you're there through proxy or directly, okay, indirectly, everyone that was involved in that chain should be held accountable. I'm sorry, they just should. And then of course, look at what's going on with Ukraine and Russia, right? China's knocking at Taiwan's door, so we've got a lot of things. So nobody wants loss of life in war. Like that's the worst outcome ever, right? Because then innocent lives too are lost as collateral damage, right? Nobody wants that. Nobody wishes that, okay, at all. But put yourself in the person's shoes, though, that's going through that loss, and then try to have some compassion and empathy is all I'm trying to say, right? And don't rush them through, because even though you might have gone through something similar, your grief pattern and journey is going to be vastly different than somebody else's, because we're all different people. We're all just wired differently. But that's the beautiful thing, right? So even our brains are wired differently. Our neurotransmitters and the way we process things are different, because we have different memories, different life experiences, different everything, different chemical makeups in our bodies too, right? How we perceive things, how we were brought up, familial, religious, culturally, right? All of that comes into play as far as how we perceive things, okay? A lot of people, though, unfortunately, are succumbing to propaganda, right? And they're easily manipulated, okay, or influenced by certain images that they see, and not really doing some underlying deep dive research and analyses to see whether or not that image was, AI generated, or whether or not it's fact or fiction, right? So I just say caution with everyone, because again, everybody's on high alert, everybody's on high emotion. There's a lot going on. I mean, it started years ago, but all the way COVID forward, there's been a lot of different things that have just been fully, that have captivated the entire world, right? And caused everyone to be disarray. I think it was like a blister that just festered and popped, right? So I think it was the inevitable, but I think all of these multiple, elements that are just cooking, it's kind of lighting the fire, and it's a perfect, that's all the kindling and things. Instead of the fire being put out, it's being stoked, okay, and getting larger and larger and larger, right? And to the point where I believe it's out of control. It's like a wildfire at this point. And again, I'm hoping we can come back from it as humans. I'm not sure that we can, though. I'm not sure it's in us. I mean, look at history. I've been actually listening to Audible, right? But I'm listening to the Bible, okay? And I'm doing that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is listen to the Torah. And then I'm going to listen to, the Quran, right? And anything else, right? Because I'm trying to also, just educate myself also for the things. A lot of people quote certain things, but don't have the context. And so, I'm listening to all that so I can have a better understanding of, especially with the construct of what's going on. Because a lot of people quote it in X spaces or what have you. People have no idea what they're talking about. But if you actually read the Bible, I'm in Isaiah now, but all the way through even Genesis, through even Job and all that. I mean, all of that was war. It was all war. It was war after war after war, conquered and be conquered. And it was ridiculous. So we've been, again, since the dawn of time, we've been at each other's throats. And, we've never really experienced peace, I don't think. And, I think of in America. America is the great, experiment, right? The democratic experiment. But I don't think we've ever been a true democracy, because if you look up, we're more like a plutocracy with democratic undertones. But I don't know that we've ever been a full democracy. Just look up what plutocracy means. Pluto, like the planet, or the former planet, I should say. But P as in Papa, Lutocracy, plutocracy. In case I'm not clear in the vocal, podcast. But look it up, because again, what it means is that we're basically managed by and run by the elite, right? It's not a black versus white problem. It's a rich versus poor problem. I'll just put it that way. And you can see, if you look at what plutocracy, actually, the definition of plutocracy, that's more like what we are, or at least what we become here in the West, United States specifically, right? Because I'm an American. I love my country, I do, and I'm not going to apologize for that.